The ledger was found in a storage unit in Missouri, Lot 237, auctioned for unpaid rent after 18 months of silence. The buyer, a reseller from Kansas City, thought it was junk until he opened it and saw the names did not match the motels. Listen to this: 43 entries, 18 months, 7 motels across 3 states, same handwriting every time, but every name was different. First name, last name, license plate, room number, date. Neat block letters, blue ink. No corrections. The kind of record someone keeps when they want to remember exactly where they have been. The first entry was dated March of the year before last. The last entry stopped in August, mid-route, like someone had been interrupted. 3 weeks after the auction, a detective in a small department outside Springfield pulled a missing person file and noticed the timing. A woman had disappeared from a motel off Route 44, same week as one of the ledger entries. Same town. The name in the ledger was not hers, but the room number matched the last place her phone had pinged. That detective made a call, then another. Then the FBI got involved, and the case stopped being about one missing person. It became about a pattern no one had been looking for, because no one knew the ledger existed. The question that drives this entire investigation is simple. Who kept this ledger, and why did they stop? My name is not important to this story. I am a researcher, not law enforcement. I was brought in because I specialize in pattern analysis for cold cases, and because the FBI task force needed someone who could work outside official channels when the case started pushing back. What I found in that ledger was not random. It was a route, a deliberate, methodical route that crossed state lines, avoided cameras, and targeted people who were already vulnerable. The ledger itself is unremarkable. Leather-bound, 8 by 10 inches, the kind you can buy at any office supply store. No branding, no custom printing, just lined pages and a clasp that does not lock. The handwriting is consistent across all 43 entries. Forensic analysis confirmed it was written by the same person, using the same pen type, over the course of 18 months. Blue ballpoint, medium point, probably a cheap disposable. No fingerprints. The ledger had been wiped clean before it was abandoned. Each entry follows the same format: date, motel name, room number, guest name, license plate. No additional notes, no commentary, no identifying details about the person who wrote it. Just data. Cold, precise, repeatable data. The motels are all small independent operations. No chains, no corporate oversight, no centralized record keeping. The kind of places where you pay cash, sign a paper ledger, and no one asks questions. The kind of places where security cameras are old or broken or pointed at the wrong angles. The kind of places where people disappear and no one notices for days. The first confirmed connection was Emily Marsh, age 31, last seen at the Blue Star Motel outside Joplin, Missouri, on a Tuesday night in April. She had checked in alone, paid cash, and told the desk clerk she was driving through on her way to visit family in Oklahoma. Her car was found in the motel parking lot 3 days later. Keys in the ignition, phone on the passenger seat, wallet still in her purse. No signs of struggle, no blood, no witnesses, just gone. The ledger entry for that date and location lists a guest named Michael Brennan. Room 14, license plate ending in 7J4. Emily Marsh stayed in room 12. 9. The name Michael Brennan does not appear in any official motel records. The room was listed as vacant that night. The license plate does not exist in any state database. 2 weeks later, a man named David Cho disappeared from a motel in Kansas. Same pattern. Cash payment, no official record, car left behind, phone dead. The ledger has an entry for that motel. Same night, different fake name. Room 3 doors down from where David Cho stayed. Again, the license plate is fake. Again, the name does not match any real registration. The pattern repeats. Tulsa, Little Rock, Springfield, Wichita, Columbia. 7 motels, 11 missing persons, 18 months, and every single time the ledger has an entry that places someone nearby on the exact same night. Not the victim, someone else, someone watching. The task force pulled every missing person report filed within 72 hours of a ledger entry. 19 cases total. 11 confirmed disappearances with no resolution. 8 cold cases where the person eventually turned up alive or dead, but always with gaps in the timeline that matched the ledger dates. Every single one had stayed at a motel listed in the ledger or near one within 48 hours of the entry. This is not coincidence. This is surveillance. The working theory is that the ledger belonged to someone who was tracking potential victims. Someone who checked into motels under fake names, watched, waited, and selected targets based on vulnerability. Someone who understood how to move without leaving digital trails, how to avoid cameras, how to pick people who would not be missed quickly. Someone who kept meticulous records because they wanted to remember, or because they needed to plan. But here is the part that tightens everything. The ledger stops in August, mid-route. The last entry is dated August 19th at a motel outside Branson, Missouri, room 7. Fake name, fake plate, same handwriting. But there is no disappearance tied to that entry, no missing person report, no follow-up, just a final line in the ledger, and then blank pages. Something happened in Branson, something that stopped the pattern cold, and no one knows what it was. The motel owner in Branson remembers nothing unusual that week. No guests who stood out, no incidents, no police calls. The room listed in the ledger was rented to a couple from Illinois who checked out the next morning and drove home without incident. Nothing was taken, nothing was damaged, nothing was reported. Just a normal night at a cheap motel on a back road near the lake. But the ledger stopped, and 3 weeks later, it was abandoned in a storage unit 200 miles away. So why did it stop? What changed? Who was staying in room 7? And what did they see? Those are the questions I was hired to answer. And the deeper I went into the case, the more I realized that whoever kept this ledger was still out there, still moving, still watching. They just were not writing it down anymore. The first interview I conducted was with the motel clerk in Joplin, the Blue Star, where Emily Marsh disappeared. Her name was Rita, late 50s, 20 years behind the desk, tired eyes, and a voice that had answered the same questions too many times. She remembered Emily because Emily had asked for a room on the second floor, away from the highway noise, and Rita had thought that was smart. Most people did not care. Most people just wanted cheap and close to the interstate. Rita did not remember anyone else checking in that night. She did not remember the name Michael Brennan. She did not remember any guests who paid cash and avoided eye contact. But when I showed her the ledger entry, she went quiet for a long time, and then she said something that changed the direction of the investigation. She said the cameras were off that night. Not broken. Off. Someone had unplugged the main recorder in the back office, and no one noticed until the next morning when the day shift came in. Rita assumed it was an accident, a loose plug, maybe a power glitch, but the timing was exact. The cameras went dark at 11 p.m., right when Emily Marsh checked in, and they stayed dark until 6 a.m., when the plug was found on the floor behind the desk. No one touched the plug. Rita was sure. She had been at the desk all night, and the back office door was locked. The only other key was in the manager's house, 2 miles away. So either Rita is lying, or someone found a way into that office without being seen. I asked her if anyone had access to the building besides staff. She said no. Then she paused. Then she said, "Well, maintenance comes through sometimes, but we do not have regular maintenance. Just when something breaks." I asked if anything had broken that week. She said the ice machine had stopped working 2 days before Emily checked in. A repair guy came out, fixed it, left. She did not remember his name. She did not remember his company. He paid cash, no receipt, no paperwork. Just showed up, said he was called about the machine, fixed it in 20 minutes, and drove off in a white van with no markings. That is the moment the case turned from pattern analysis into active danger. Because if someone posing as a maintenance worker had access to the motel, they could have planted the fake ledger entry, disabled the cameras, and walked away clean. And if they did it once, they did it at every motel on the route. I pulled records for every motel in the ledger. 4 of them had maintenance calls in the week before a disappearance. 2 had camera outages on the exact night of the ledger entry. 1 had a fire alarm malfunction that cleared the building for 30 minutes, right when the victim was last seen. Every single incident was logged as minor, routine, forgettable, and every single one gave someone access to the building, the records, and the guests. This was not opportunistic. This was planned, methodical, surgical. The FBI task force escalated the investigation to interstate fugitive status and opened a VICAP case file. They pulled surveillance from every highway rest stop and gas station within 50 miles of each motel. They interviewed every known maintenance contractor in the region. They ran forensic analysis on the ledger ink, the paper, the binding. They built timelines, cross-referenced travel records, and flagged every white van registered in the 3-state area. And they found nothing. No matches, no prints, no DNA, no witnesses who could describe a face. Just a ledger full of lies and a string of people who vanished in the night. I kept working the case from the outside. I focused on the last entry, the Branson Motel, Room 7. If something had stopped the pattern there, it meant someone had interrupted the routine. Someone had seen something or done something that forced the person keeping the ledger to abandon it and disappear. I drove to Branson on a cold afternoon in September, rain turning the highway into a grey smear of brake lights and spray. The motel was called the Lakeview Inn, which was a lie because you could not see the lake from any of the rooms. It was set back from the main road, tucked behind a gas station and a shuttered bait shop, the kind of place you only find if you are looking for it or if you are lost. The manager was a man named Carl, 60-something, ex-Navy, ran the place with his wife. He was cooperative but skeptical. He said the FBI had already been through, already pulled records, already interviewed staff. He said there was nothing unusual about that week in August. Business had been slow. No incidents, no complaints, just regular guests passing through. I asked about room 7. He checked his files. A couple from Illinois, checked in late, checked out early, paid cash, no issues. He did not remember them specifically. Hundreds of guests every season, all the same. I asked if anyone else had checked in that night. He looked at the ledger. 3 other rooms occupied. Families, road trippers, no one suspicious. Everyone checked out on time, no problems. I asked about maintenance. He said they do not contract out. His wife handles most repairs. And if something is too big, they call a guy they have used for years. I asked if that guy had been out in August. Carl said no. Nothing had broken. Then I asked if anyone had asked about renting a room but had not checked in. Carl frowned. He said, "Funny you asked that. There was a guy. Came in around 10 p.m., asked if they had a room with a view of the parking lot. Carl said they did not do requests like that. Rooms were assigned in order. The guy thanked him and left. Never came back. I asked what the guy looked like. Carl said he could not remember. Just a guy. Average height, average build, maybe 40, maybe 50. Wore a cap, kept his head down. Paid in cash for nothing because he did not stay. Carl thought it was strange at the time, but forgot about it an hour later." That is the rupture point. That is where the ledger stops. Because whoever kept it realized they were being noticed. They walked into that motel, asked the wrong question, and Carl remembered it. Not enough to describe a face, but enough to break the pattern, enough to make them walk away. I asked Carl if he told the FBI about this. He said no, because it did not seem relevant. Just a guy who changed his mind. Happens all the time. But it was relevant. It was the only moment in 18 months where someone keeping this ledger made a mistake, got cautious, and stopped. I spent the rest of that day pulling records, checking local reports, looking for any other incidents in Branson during that same week. No missing persons, no assaults, no thefts, nothing. Which means whoever kept the ledger did not act that night. They just vanished. And 3 weeks later, the storage unit in Missouri went unpaid. 3 weeks after that, the ledger was auctioned off. 3 weeks after that, I was sitting in a police conference room staring at 43 entries and wondering if the person who wrote them was still hunting, or if they were just better at hiding now. The rain keeps falling. The highway noise never stops. Somewhere out there, someone is checking into a motel under a name that does not exist, watching, waiting, keeping a new ledger that no one will find until it is to the FBI task force assigned to the case operates out of a field office in Springfield, 3rd floor of a building that smells like old carpet and burnt coffee. I met with the lead agent, a woman named Sarah Vickery, 2 days after my trip to Branson. She had been running point on the interstate coordination for 6 weeks, ever since the pattern became undeniable. She was sharp, methodical, and visibly frustrated by the lack of physical evidence. She spread the case files across a conference table: 11 confirmed missing persons, 7 motels, 3 states, and not a single forensic link between any of them. No DNA, no fibers, no weapon, no witnesses who could identify a suspect. Just the ledger, and the ledger told us nothing about who held the pen. Vickery walked me through the timeline. The first disappearance was Emily Marsh in April. The last confirmed disappearance tied to a ledger entry was in late July, a man named Kenneth Pryor, who vanished from a motel outside Wichita. His car was found in the parking lot, keys on the dash, wallet untouched. No sign of struggle, no indication he had planned to leave. He had checked in alone, told the desk clerk he was driving to Denver for work, and then he was gone. The ledger entry for that night lists a guest named Robert Hayes, room 9, license plate ending in 3K2. Kenneth Pryor stayed in room 11. Same pattern. Fake name, fake plate. No official record. And just like every other case, the cameras at that motel had malfunctioned. Not broken, just offline for 6 hours during the exact window when Kenneth disappeared. Vickery said the working theory was abduction for unknown purposes. No ransom demands, no bodies recovered, no evidence of human trafficking networks. Just people vanishing cleanly, and whoever took them knew how to do it without leaving traces. I asked her about the Branson incident, the man who asked about a parking lot view and then left. She said it was the first time anyone had reported a potential sighting that matched the timeline. Every other motel had no memory of anyone suspicious. But Carl at the Lakeview Inn remembered that moment, and that made it significant. Vickery had already sent agents back to Branson to re-interview Carl, pull traffic camera footage from nearby intersections, and check for any vehicles that matched the white van reports from earlier maintenance incidents. Nothing came back. No van, no plates, no witnesses, just a vague memory of a man in a cab who walked in and walked out. I asked if the task force had identified any common factors among the victims. Vickery opened a file. Emily Marsh, 31, traveling alone, no close family, worked remote as a freelance editor. David Cho, 28, between jobs, estranged from parents, no permanent address. Kenneth Pryor, 43, divorced, no kids, worked contract security. The pattern was isolation. Every victim was traveling alone, had weak social ties, and would not be reported missing quickly. Some were not reported for weeks. Vickery said that was the selection criteria. Whoever kept the ledger was targeting people who could disappear without immediate alarm. People who moved frequently, paid cash, avoided records. People who were already halfway invisible. I asked how the task force had identified the other victims tied to the ledger entries. Vickery said they cross-referenced every motel, every date, and every missing person report filed within 72 hours. Then they expanded the search to cold cases, unidentified remains, and Jane Does found near highway routes. 3 of the ledger entries matched cold cases where bodies were eventually recovered. All three had been found in rural areas, off secondary roads, weeks or months after disappearance. Cause of death varied. One overdose, one exposure, one blunt force trauma. No forensic connections between them. That told me the person keeping the ledger was not operating with a single method. They adapted. They used opportunity. They were careful, patient, and smart enough to vary their approach so no single pattern would trigger a multi-state investigation. Except they had made one mistake. They had kept a record. I asked Vickery why someone would keep a ledger at all. She said that was the question that kept her awake. Most offenders who operate at this level avoid documentation. They rely on memory, routine, and discipline. But this person had written everything down in clear handwriting, in a format that looked almost professional, like a log, like a job. Vickery said the behavioral analysis unit had two theories. One, the ledger was a trophy system, a way to relive the events and maintain control. Two, the ledger was operational, a tool for tracking movements and avoiding repetition. Either way, it suggested someone who was organized, confident, and had been doing this longer than 18 months. I asked if there were any earlier cases that might connect. Vickery said they were looking. VICAP searches for similar patterns going back 5 years had turned up dozens of possibles, but nothing definitive. Motels were common sites for disappearances, transient populations, cash transactions, low security. Without the ledger, these cases would have remained isolated incidents in separate jurisdictions, never linked, never investigated as a series. That was the edge we had. The ledger connected them, and now we had to find the person who wrote it before they started a new one. I left the field office and drove east, back toward the chain of motels listed in the ledger. My plan was to visit each location in order, follow the route, and look for anything the official investigation might have missed. Small details, local knowledge, the kinds of things you only notice when you are asking questions no one thinks to ask. The second motel on the ledger route was a place called the Pines Motor Lodge, just outside Tulsa. It was a low brick building with 12 units and a gravel parking lot, set back from the highway behind a cluster of trees that gave it its name. The disappearance tied to this location was a woman named Jessica Browning, age 36, last seen in May. She had checked in late, paid cash, and never checked out. Her car was found unlocked, phone dead, no luggage inside. She was reported missing by her employer when she failed to show up for a scheduled client meeting 3 days later. The ledger entry for that night lists a guest named Thomas White, room 4, license plate ending in 8R1. Jessica Browning stayed in room 6, same pattern, fake name, fake plate, no record. I spoke with the motel owner, a man named Ray, who had taken over the property from his father 2 years earlier. He was polite, but guarded, clearly tired of investigators asking the same questions. He said the FBI had already been through, already pulled records, already interviewed him twice. He did not remember Jessica Browning. He did not remember anyone named Thomas White. He said it was a busy season. People came and went, and unless someone caused trouble, he did not pay attention. I asked about maintenance. Ray said they had a guy who came out once a month to check the air conditioners and the wiring. I asked if that guy had been out in May. Ray checked his phone, scrolled through texts, said yeah, he had come out the first week of May to fix a breaker that kept tripping. Came in the afternoon, finished in an hour, sent a bill by email. I asked if Ray had ever met the guy in person. He said no. He hired him online through a local service board, paid by app, never saw his face. The guy always worked alone, always finished fast, always left the place cleaner than he found it. Ray said he was reliable, which was rare. I asked if Ray still had contact information. He gave me a name, a phone number, and an email address. I wrote it down, thanked him, and walked the property. 12 units, identical layout, doors facing the parking lot, windows facing the trees. No cameras, no exterior lights except above the office door. At night, this place would be dark, isolated, and easy to move through unnoticed. I checked the room where Jessica Browning had stayed. Room 6, ground floor, corner unit, farthest from the office. The door faced the tree line. At night, someone standing at that door would be invisible from the road. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind move through the branches, and I thought about how easy it would be to knock, wait, and disappear. When I got back to my car, I called the number Ray had given me for the maintenance contractor. It rang 4 times, then went to a generic voicemail. No name, no greeting, just a beep. I left a message, asked for a callback, gave my number. Then I sent a text with the same information. No response. I tried the email address. It bounced back. Invalid recipient. That was the second red flag. The first was the cameras at the Blue Star Motel going offline. The second was a maintenance contractor who no longer existed. I called Vickery and told her what I had found. She said they would run the phone number, trace the email, and check the service board where Ray had hired the contractor. I told her I was going to keep moving down the route, hitting every motel in the ledger and looking for the same pattern. Maintenance calls, camera outages, anything that gave someone access without a trail. She said to be careful. She said if this person was still active, and if they realized someone was tracing the route, they might take an interest in who was asking questions. I told her I was aware of the risk. She said that was not the same as being prepared for it. I spent the next week driving. Little Rock, Springfield, Wichita, Columbia. I visited every motel, spoke with every owner or manager who would talk, and collected the same refrain. No memory of the victims. No memory of suspicious guests. Maintenance calls that were routine, minor, forgettable. And in 3 of the 7 motels, the same pattern. A contractor hired online, paid by app. No face-to-face meeting. No follow-up records. I compiled the names and numbers. 6 different names, 6 different phone numbers, 6 different email addresses. I tried all of them. 2 numbers were disconnected. 3 went to voicemail, no callback. 1 rang continuously, never answered. All 6 email addresses bounced. Vickery ran every number through law enforcement databases. None of them were registered. All were burner phones, activated within days of the maintenance call, used once or twice, then discarded. The email addresses were anonymous, created on free services, deleted shortly after use. This was not a contractor. This was someone creating false identities to gain access to the motels, disable security, and position themselves near potential victims. Someone who understood digital anonymity, operational security, and how to move through low-income transient spaces without being questioned. The task force brought in a cyber analyst to trace the service boards where the contractors had been hired. All 6 posts had been made from different IP addresses, none traceable to a physical location. All 6 posts had been removed within weeks of the maintenance calls. The accounts used to make the posts were deleted. No recovery possible. Vickery said this was the behavior of someone with technical skill, patience, and experience, not a drifter, not an opportunistic predator. Someone who had done this before, possibly for years, possibly in other regions, under other methods. I asked if the task force had expanded the search to other states. She said they had. VICAP queries were running nationwide, looking for similar patterns: missing persons tied to motels, maintenance anomalies, camera outages, isolation factors. Preliminary results showed over 200 possible cases in the past decade. Most were still under review. That number was suffocating. If even a fraction of those cases were connected, we were looking at someone who had been operating for years, moving across state lines, refining their methods, and staying ahead of every investigation. I asked Vickery what the next step was. She said the task force was focusing on the Branson incident. If that was the moment the pattern broke, then something about that motel, that night, or that interaction had spooked the person enough to stop. If they could identify what that was, they might be able to predict where the person went next. I told her I wanted to go back to Branson. I wanted to re-interview Carl, press him for more details, and see if there was anything he had forgotten or dismissed. Vickery said the FBI had already done that twice. I said I would do it a 3rd time. I drove back to Branson on a Thursday afternoon, the sky low and grey, the highway slick with rain. The Lakeview Inn looked the same faded sign, same empty parking lot, same smell of mildew and old smoke. Carl was in the office, watching a game show on a small television. He recognized me, waved me in, muted the TV. I told him I had a few more questions. He sighed but nodded. I asked him to walk me through the night of August 19th again, step by step. He said it was slow, only 3 rooms occupied, no incidents, no complaints. The couple in room 7 checked out early the next morning, left the room clean, no issues. I asked about the man who came in and asked about the parking lot view. Carl said he came in around 10 p.m., maybe a little later. Asked if they had a room with a view of the parking lot. Carl told him they did not do special requests. Rooms were assigned in order. The guy thanked him and left. Never came back. I asked Carl to describe him again. Carl closed his eyes, thought for a moment, said he was average height, maybe 5'10", maybe 5'11", average build, not heavy, not thin. Wore a dark cap, pulled low, dark jacket, jeans maybe. Kept his head down, did not make eye contact. Spoke quietly, polite, no accent. Paid in cash for nothing, because he did not stay. I asked if Carl noticed anything else. Scars, tattoos, jewelry, a watch, anything. Carl shook his head, said the guy was just forgettable, the kind of person you see and then do not remember 5 minutes later. I asked if Carl had seen a vehicle. Carl said no, he did not look outside. The guy walked in, asked the question, and left. Carl assumed he drove off, but he did not watch. I asked if there were any other guests in the lobby at that time. Carl said no, it was just him and the guy. The other guests were already in their rooms. I asked if anyone had called the motel that night, asking about vacancies or directions. Carl checked the phone log. No calls after 9 p.m. I thanked Carl and walked outside. I stood in the parking lot, looking at the layout. Room 7 was on the far end, ground floor, door facing the lot. If someone had been watching that room, they would have had a clear line of sight from the road or from a vehicle parked at the gas station next door. I walked over to the gas station. It was open, fluorescent lights humming, a clerk inside scrolling on a phone. I asked if they had security cameras. The clerk said yeah, above the pumps and above the register. I asked if the footage was kept. The clerk said 30 days, then it gets overwritten. I asked if the FBI had pulled footage from August. The clerk said yeah. They came by a few weeks ago, took copies, did not say why. I asked if the clerk remembered anything unusual that night, August 19th. The clerk shrugged, said they were not working that night, could not help. I asked who was working that night. The clerk checked the schedule on a clipboard, said a guy named Danny, but he quit last month, moved to Texas, no contact info. Another dead end, another missing piece. I drove back to Springfield and called Vickery. I told her the Branson lead was cold. No new details, no witnesses, no footage that showed anything useful. Vickery said the FBI had reviewed the gas station footage. It showed several vehicles coming and going that night, none that matched known suspect profiles, none that lingered long enough to suggest surveillance. I asked if any of those vehicles were white vans. Vickery said no. 2 sedans, 1 pickup truck, 1 motorcycle. None registered to anyone connected to the case. I asked if the task force had identified the couple who stayed in room 7 that night. Vickery said yes. They had been located and interviewed. A married couple from Illinois, both in their 50s. No criminal history, no connection to any of the victims. They had been driving through, stopped for the night, checked out the next morning, continued to Branson for a weekend getaway. They did not see anything unusual. They did not interact with anyone besides Carl at the front desk. So the trailer Branson led nowhere. The man who asked about the parking lot view was gone, untraceable, and possibly never coming back. But the ledger had stopped there. That meant something had changed. And if the person keeping the ledger had abandoned it because they felt exposed, then they were not gone. They were just adapting. Vickery said the task force was shifting focus to predictive analysis. If the person was still active, they would return to the same type of locations: small motels, transient populations, weak security, isolated victims. The task force was working with state police in Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma to flag any new missing person reports that matched the profile. If another disappearance occurred with similar factors, they would respond immediately. I asked what I should do next. Vickery said the task force appreciated my work, but the case was now federal priority, and they had resources I did not. She said I should step back, let the professionals handle it, and stay safe. I told her I would think about it. Then I hung up and kept driving. Because there was one detail that did not fit. One detail that no one had explained. The storage unit in Missouri, lot 237, where the ledger was found. It had been rented 6 months before the ledger stopped. Rented under a fake name, paid in cash, no contact information, no security deposit. The rental lasted 18 months, then went unpaid, then was auctioned. Why would someone rent a storage unit 6 months into an active operation, keep it for a year, and then abandon it with the ledger inside? Why not destroy the ledger? Why not burn it, shred it, bury it? Why leave it in a place where it could be found? I drove to the storage facility, a low-budget operation on the edge of a commercial district, rows of corrugated metal units behind a chain-link fence. The office was a trailer. The manager was a woman named Linda, mid-40s, bored expression. I told her I was researching the ledger case. She said the FBI had already been through, already pulled records, already interviewed her twice. She did not remember the person who rented lot 237, paid cash, did not give a real name, never came back after the first month. I asked if there were security cameras. Linda said yeah, but they only covered the entrance gate, not the individual units. I asked if the FBI had pulled footage. She said yeah, but the footage only went back 90 days, and the unit had been rented over a year ago. Nothing useful. I asked if Linda remembered anything unusual about the rental. She thought for a moment, then said the person had asked for a unit in the back, away from the entrance. Paid 6 months up front, cash, no questions. Linda said that was unusual, but not unheard of. Some people just want privacy. I asked if the person had ever accessed the unit after the initial rental. Linda said she did not know. There were no logs, no check-ins. People came and went, used their own locks, and the facility did not track it. I asked if I could see lot 237. Linda hesitated, then shrugged, said the FBI had cleared it, nothing left inside. She gave me a key and pointed toward the back row. I walked the gravel path between the units, past rusted doors and peeling paint numbers. Lot 237 was at the far end, tucked behind a dumpster, barely visible from the entrance. The door was unlocked, the interior empty, just concrete floor, metal walls, and the smell of dust. I stood in the doorway and tried to imagine why someone would choose this place. It was not convenient. It was not secure. It was not discreet, because storage facilities keep records. So why rent it at all? Unless the point was not to hide the ledger permanently, unless the point was to leave it somewhere it would eventually be found, somewhere it would trigger an investigation, somewhere it would create noise. That thought stopped me cold, because if the ledger was intentional, if it was bait, then the person who wrote it wanted law enforcement to find it, wanted us to chase the pattern, wanted us to focus on motels, maintenance, and fake names, wanted us to look in one direction while they moved in another. I called Vickery. I told her my theory. She listened, did not interrupt, and then she said the behavioral analysis unit had considered that possibility, But the evidence did not support it. The victims were real. The disappearances were real. The pattern was consistent. If the ledger was bait, it was bait attached to real crimes, and that did not make sense. I said, maybe the crimes were real, but the ledger was only part of the story. Maybe there were other victims, other motels, other methods that were not written down. Maybe the ledger was a decoy, a limited sample, designed to focus the investigation on a specific time frame and region, while the real scope was much larger. Vickery went quiet. Then she said she would bring that to the task force. Then she asked me where I was. I told her. She told me to leave the storage facility, go home, and stay out of the field. She said if my theory was right, then the person who wrote the ledger knew it would be found, knew it would be investigated, and might be watching to see who followed the trail. I told her I would be careful. She said that was not good enough. She said I was a civilian, not law enforcement, and if something happened to me, the task force would have another victim and no new leads. I told her I understood. Then I left the storage facility, got in my car, and drove to a diner 2 miles away. I ordered coffee, opened my laptop, and started mapping the case from the beginning. 43 ledger entries, 18 months, 7 motels, 11 confirmed victims, 3 states, and 1 storage unit rented 6 months into the operation, abandoned 3 weeks after the pattern stopped. I pulled up satellite images of each motel. I measured distances between them. I calculated drive times. I cross-referenced highway routes, truck stops, rest areas, and secondary roads. I looked for patterns within the pattern. And I found one. Every motel in the ledger was located within 30 miles of a major interstate exit. Every motel was within 10 miles of a truck stop or a 24-hour rest area. Every motel was within 5 miles of a secondary road that provided multiple exit routes. This was not random. This was a route, a deliberate, repeatable route that followed the logistics of long-haul trucking. Someone who drove for a living, someone who moved freight across state lines, someone who had access to motels, truck stops, and transient populations as part of their job. I called Vickery. I told her to pull records for every commercial trucking company operating in Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma. I told her to cross-reference driver logs with the dates and locations in the ledger. I told her to look for drivers who were in the area on the nights of the disappearances. Vickery said that was thousands of drivers, hundreds of companies, and months of data analysis. I said it was the only lead that explained the route, the timing, and the access. She said she would pass it to the task force. She said it was a good theory. She said they would run it. Then she told me again to stay out of the field. I told her I would. I hung up. I finished my coffee. And then I got back in my car and kept driving. Because I knew that if the person who wrote the ledger was a truck driver, they were still on the road, still moving, still hunting. And the only way to find them was to follow the route they had already mapped out. The trucking angle opened a new line of investigation, but it also revealed how vast the problem was. The task force pulled records from the Department of Transportation, cross-referencing commercial driver logs with the dates and locations in the ledger. The initial data set included over 4,000 active drivers who had operated in the 3-state region during the 18-month window. Vickery called me 3 days later. She said the data analysis was underway, but it would take weeks to narrow down the list. They were prioritizing drivers with solo routes, overnight hauls, and frequent stops near the motel locations. They were also looking for drivers with prior criminal records, employment gaps, or behavioral red flags in their hiring history. I asked if they had found any matches yet. She said preliminary results showed 217 drivers who had been within 50 miles of at least 3 ledger locations on the relevant dates. Of those, 39 had been within 10 miles of 5 or more locations. Of those, 6 had been flagged for further review based on employment records and background checks. I asked what the flags were. Vickery said one driver had a prior arrest for assault. Charges dropped. One had been fired from a previous company for falsifying log entries. One had a gap in employment that lined up with the ledger timeline. 3 had complaints filed by dispatch or co-workers for erratic behavior, but nothing that resulted in termination. I asked if any of the 6 drivers were still active. Vickery said 4 were still driving. 2 had left the industry in the past 6 months. The task force was prioritizing interviews with the 4 active drivers, starting with the one who had the employment gap. His name was Cole Driscoll, age 42, solo driver for a mid-size freight company based in Kansas City. He had been hired 3 years ago, worked steady routes through Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma, and had logged over 100,000 miles during the ledger timeline. His employment records showed a 3-month gap in the fall of the previous year, during which he had claimed family medical leave. The company had not verified the claim because Driscoll had provided documentation from a clinic in Missouri, and the HR department had processed it without follow-up. Vickery said the FBI was trying to locate Driscoll for an interview, but he had not responded to calls or messages. His dispatcher said Driscoll was currently on a long-haul route to Texas, expected back in 5 days. The task force was coordinating with state police to intercept him at a way station when he crossed back into Missouri. I asked if Driscoll had any connection to the maintenance contractor aliases. Vickery said they were checking phone records, email accounts, and financial transactions, but so far there were no direct links. Driscoll paid his bills on time, had no significant debts, and kept a low profile. No criminal record beyond a speeding ticket from 2 years ago. No complaints from neighbors or employers beyond the falsified log entry, which had been a minor infraction related to drive time limits. I asked if the task force had interviewed anyone who knew Driscoll personally. Vickery said they were working on it. Driscoll lived alone in a rental apartment outside Kansas City. No family in the area. No close friends that anyone could identify. His landlord said he was quiet, paid rent on time, and was rarely home. His dispatcher said he was reliable, did not socialize with other drivers, and preferred solo routes. That profile fit: isolated, mobile, methodical, and invisible. I asked Vickery if I could sit in on the interview when they brought Driscoll in. She said no. Federal case, restricted access, no civilians. I told her I had been tracking this case longer than anyone outside the task force. She said that did not change the rules. She said I had provided valuable leads, and the task force appreciated it. But from this point forward, the investigation was operational, and I needed to stay clear, I told her I understood. Then I hung up and looked at the map I had been building on my laptop. Driscoll's routes, cross-referenced with the ledger locations, showed a near-perfect match. He had been within 20 miles of every motel on the dates of the disappearances. His logged stops at truck stops and rest areas placed him in the region during the exact windows when the victims went missing. But there was something else, a detail that did not fit the trucking theory. The maintenance contractor aliases had required on-site access to the motels, sometimes days before the disappearances. Driscoll would have needed time to pose as a contractor, gain access, disable cameras, and set up the conditions for abduction. That required advanced planning, local knowledge, and the ability to move freely without his dispatcher noticing gaps in his route. I pulled Driscoll's log drive times and compared them to the maintenance call records. In 4 of the 7 motels, there were gaps in Driscoll's logs that aligned with the maintenance calls. Small gaps, 2 to 4 hours, logged as rest breaks or equipment inspections. Not unusual for a long-haul driver, but enough time to drive to a nearby motel, perform a quick repair job under a fake name, and return to the route. That was the method. Driscoll was using his legitimate job as cover, taking advantage of the flexibility in solo driver schedules to create windows for surveillance and preparation. He was not deviating from his routes in obvious ways. He was threading the maintenance work into the normal rhythms of his job, making it invisible to dispatch and impossible to detect without cross-referencing multiple data sources. I called Vickery back. I told her what I had found. She said the task force had already identified the same pattern. They were building a case file that would present the timeline, the logs, and the maintenance records as a unified theory of operation. But they still needed direct evidence. They needed forensic links, witness identification, or a confession. Without that, the case was circumstantial. I asked what would happen when they intercepted Driscoll at the way station. Vickery said they would ask him to come in for a voluntary interview. If he refused, they would need probable cause to detain him. If he agreed, they would question him about his routes, his whereabouts on specific dates, and any knowledge of the victims. If he asked for a lawyer, the interview would end, and the task force would need to pursue a warrant. I asked what the chances were that Driscoll would cooperate. Vickery said it depended on whether he believed the investigation was focused on him specifically, or whether he thought he was one of many drivers being interviewed as part of a broad inquiry. If the task force played it carefully, they might get useful information before he realized he was the primary suspect. I asked what I should do. Vickery said nothing. She said I should go home, stay out of the field, and let the professionals handle it. She said the case was close to breaking, and the last thing they needed was a civilian complicating the operation. I told her I would stay clear. I meant it at the time. But 2 days later, I got a call from Ray, the owner of the Pines Motor Lodge in Tulsa, the second motel on the Ledger route. He said someone had been asking questions about the case. Not FBI, not police, just a guy who came by, said he was a journalist, asked about the disappearance of Jessica Browning, asked about maintenance records, asked if Ray remembered anyone suspicious. I asked Ray what the guy looked like. Ray said he was average height, maybe 5'10", wearing a dark jacket and a cap, kept his head down, did not stay long. Asked a few questions, thanked Ray, and left. Ray said he did not think much of it until later, when he remembered the FBI had told him to report any unusual inquiries. I asked Ray if the guy had given a name. Ray said no, just said he was working on a story about disappearances in the region. Ray said he did not think to ask for credentials. I asked if Ray had seen a vehicle. Ray said yeah, a white van, parked near the tree line, engine running. The guy got in and drove off before Ray could get a plate number. I thanked Ray and hung up. Then I called Vickery. I told her someone was retracing the route, asking questions at the motels and driving a white van. She said the task force was aware. They had received similar reports from 2 other motel owners in the past 48 hours. Someone was moving along the Ledger route, conducting their own investigation, and the task force believed it was Driscoll. I asked why Driscoll would return to the motels. Vickery said the behavioral analysis unit had 2 theories. 1, he was checking to see if anyone had connected the cases. 2, he was cleaning up, removing any remaining evidence or loose ends. Either way, it meant Driscoll knew the investigation was active, and he was taking steps to protect himself. I asked if the task force was tracking the van. Vickery said they were trying, but the reports were coming in after the fact, and by the time local police responded, the van was gone. They had issued a bolo for a white van with no plates visible, but there were hundreds of white vans in the region, and without a specific description, it was difficult to narrow down. I asked if Driscoll was still expected to return to Missouri in 3 days. Vickery said his dispatcher had confirmed he was on schedule, but the task force was concerned he might deviate from the route if he suspected he was being watched. They were coordinating with state police in Texas to locate him and conduct a traffic stop under a pretext, just to confirm his location and appearance. I asked what the pretext would be. Vickery said a routine inspection, weight check, paperwork verification. Nothing that would tip him off, but enough to bring him in contact with law enforcement and get a positive ID. I asked what would happen if Driscoll ran. Vickery said the task force was prepared for that scenario. They had alerts out across multiple states, and if Driscoll disappeared, every way station, truck stop, and border crossing would be flagged. But running would also confirm guilt, and the task force preferred to bring him in cleanly, under controlled conditions, without a chase. I told Vickery I wanted to be there when they interviewed him. She said no, and she said it with finality. She said the case was federal. The interview would be conducted by trained agents, and my presence would complicate the legal process. She said if I showed up anywhere near the field office or the interview location, I would be removed and possibly charged with obstruction. I told her I understood. Then I asked her to call me when the interview was over, to let me know what Driscoll said. She said she would consider it, but no promises. I hung up and sat in my car, parked outside a truck stop near the Kansas-Missouri border. I had been following the route for days, stopping at the same locations Driscoll had logged, trying to see the pattern from his perspective. The truck stop was busy, dozens of rigs parked in neat rows, drivers moving between the showers, the restaurant, and the fuel pumps. I watched them, trying to imagine which one might be Driscoll, which one might be the person who had kept the ledger and written down the names of people who would never be seen again. The sun was setting, the sky turning orange and purple, the highway noise a constant hum. I thought about the victims, Emily Marsh, who had wanted a quiet room away from the highway. David Cho, who had been between jobs and alone. Kenneth Pryor, who had been driving to Denver and never arrived. Jessica Browning, who had checked in late and never checked out. 11 people, maybe more, who had made the mistake of stopping at the wrong motel on the wrong night, and who had crossed paths with someone who saw them as opportunities. I thought about the ledger, sitting in a storage unit for months, waiting to be found. I thought about the meticulous handwriting, the clean entries, the absence of emotion. It was not the work of someone who is desperate or impulsive. It was the work of someone who is patient, disciplined, and confident. Someone who believed they were smarter than the people looking for them. And maybe they were, because it had taken a random auction, a reseller from Kansas City, and a detective with good instincts to connect the dots. Without the ledger, these cases would still be isolated incidents, unsolved and forgotten. I stayed at the truck stop until dark, then drove to a motel on the edge of town. Not one of the motels from the ledger, just a generic chain with clean rooms and bright lights and security cameras that actually worked. I checked in, locked the door, and tried to sleep, but my mind kept running through the case, looking for the detail I had missed, the question I had not asked. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered. It was a man's voice, calm and quiet, asking if I was the person who had been asking questions about the motel disappearances. I asked who was calling. He did not answer. He said I should stop asking questions. He said the case was over. The ledger was old news and there was nothing left to find. I asked how he knew who I was. He said it did not matter. He said I was making people nervous, and nervous people made mistakes. He said if I kept pushing, someone was going to get hurt, and it might be me. I asked if this was Cole Driscoll. He laughed, a short, cold sound. He said I was asking the wrong questions. Then he hung up. I immediately called Vickery. I told her what had happened. She asked if I had recorded the call. I said no. I had not expected it. She asked if I recognized the voice. I said no, but it was calm, controlled, not aggressive. She asked if the number was still visible. I read it to her. She said she would trace it. She called me back an hour later. The number was a burner phone, activated 2 days ago, used once, and already deactivated. No way to trace it to a physical location or a specific person. But the call had been made from a cell tower near the Kansas-Missouri border, less than 10 miles from where I was staying. Vickery said I needed to leave the area immediately. She said if someone knew who I was and where I was in danger. She said the task force could not provide protection for a civilian, and the best thing I could do was go home, stay there, and let law enforcement handle the case. I told her I would, but I did not. Instead, I drove to the next motel on the Ledger route, a place called the Crossroads Inn, just outside Columbia, Missouri. It was early afternoon, the parking lot nearly empty, the office door propped open with a brick. I went inside and found the manager, a young woman named Tess, who said she had only been working there for 6 months and did not know anything about the disappearance that had occurred the previous year. I asked if anyone else on staff had been there longer. Tess said the previous manager had quit suddenly, no notice, no forwarding address. The owner lived out of state and handled everything remotely. Tess said she was basically running the place alone, and it was more work than she had expected. I asked if the FBI had been by. Tess said yeah, a few weeks ago. Asked questions, pulled records, did not tell her much. She said they asked about a guest named Michael Winters, but that name was not in the system. She said the FBI seemed frustrated. I asked if Tess had ever seen a white van around the property. She thought for a moment, then said yeah, actually, a few days ago. A white van pulled into the lot, parked near the back, stayed for maybe 10 minutes, then left. She did not see who was driving. She did not think much of it. I asked if the van had come back. Tess said no, not that she had seen. I thanked her and walked the property. The Crossroads Inn was larger than the other motels. 20 units, 2 floors, exterior staircases at each end. The disappearance tied to this location was a man named Aaron Fletcher, age 34, last seen in June. He had checked in alone, paid cash, and never checked out. His car had been found in the lot, keys under the floor mat, phone missing. He was reported missing by his sister when he did not show up for a family event. The ledger entry for that night listed a guest named Gregory Cole, room 18, license plate ending in 5M9. Aaron Fletcher had stayed in room 12, same pattern, fake name, fake plate, no record. I stood in the parking lot, looking at the layout, trying to see what Driscoll would have seen. Room 12 was on the first floor, near the center, door facing the lot. Room 18 was on the second floor, at the far end, with a clear view down the length of the building. From room 18, Driscoll would have been able to watch the other guests without being seen. He would have been able to time his movements, wait for the right moment, and act without witnesses. That was the method. Not abduction by force, but by opportunity. Driscoll was watching, waiting, and selecting victims who were alone, tired, and vulnerable. He was using his position in room 18 to surveil the property, and when the moment came, he was moving quickly and cleanly. I climbed the exterior staircase to the second floor and walked to room 18. The door was closed, the curtains drawn. I knocked. No answer. I tried the handle. Locked. I walked back down and asked Tess if room 18 was occupied. She checked the computer, said no. It had been empty for 3 days. I asked if I could see inside. Tess hesitated, then said she was not supposed to let people into rooms without authorization. I told her I was working with the FBI on the case. She asked for ID. I showed her my driver's license and a business card with my research credentials. She looked uncertain, then shrugged and grabbed a key. We went back upstairs. Tess unlocked room 18 and pushed the door open. The room was clean, bed made, no personal items, just a generic motel room that had been cleaned and reset for the next guest. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. The view looked directly down the row of first-floor rooms, including room 12. Perfect line of sight. I asked Tess if the FBI had checked this room. She said she did not know. They had not asked her about specific rooms, just pulled the guest ledger and left. I walked around the room, looking for anything out of place. Nothing. I checked the bathroom, the closet under the bed. Nothing. I went back to the window and looked at the frame, the sill, the latch. The latch was loose, the screws stripped, as if the window had been opened and closed many times. I opened it. It slid smoothly, no resistance, no noise. I looked down. The drop to the ground was about 12 feet, too high to jump safely. But there was a dumpster directly below, pushed against the building. Someone could have climbed out the window, dropped onto the dumpster, and walked away without being seen from the parking lot or the office. I asked Tess when the dumpster had been moved. She said she did not know. It had been there since she started. I asked if it was always in that position. She said yeah. The trash company had set it there and never moved it. That was the exit route. Driscoll had used room 18 as an observation post, and when he was ready to leave, he had gone out the window, dropped onto the dumpster, and disappeared without passing through the lobby or the parking lot. I took photos of the room, the window, the dumpster. Then I thanked Tess and left. I sat in my car and called Vickery. I told her what I had found. She said the task force had already identified room 18 as a potential surveillance location, but they had not found evidence to confirm it. She said the loose window latch was interesting, but it was not enough to prove Driscoll had used the room. I asked if the task force had located Driscoll yet. Vickery said yes. State police in Texas had pulled him over for a weight inspection earlier that morning. He had cooperated fully, provided documentation, and continued on his route. The officer who conducted the stop said Driscoll was calm, polite, and showed no signs of stress or evasion. He matched the physical description, but there was nothing unusual about his behavior. I asked if they had searched his truck. Vickery said no, they did not have probable cause. The stop was a routine inspection, and without a warrant, they could not search the vehicle. But they had taken note of the truck details, the company name, and Driscoll's appearance. The task force was now coordinating with the freight company to track Driscoll's movements in real time, using GPS data from the truck's onboard system. I asked when Driscoll was expected to arrive in Missouri. Vickery said tomorrow afternoon. The task force was planning to intercept him at a way station outside Kansas City and bring him in for the voluntary interview. I asked if I could be there. Vickery said no, and she sounded tired. She said I had done good work. I had provided valuable leads, but the investigation was now at a critical stage, and civilian involvement was a liability. She said I needed to trust the process and let the task force do their job. I told her I trusted the process. I just did not trust that Driscoll would cooperate. I said he had already demonstrated operational security, technical skill, and awareness of law enforcement procedures. I said if he suspected the interview was more than routine, he would lawyer up immediately, and the task force would lose their chance to get information. Vickery said the task force was aware of the risk. She said they had experienced interrogators, they had a strategy, and they were confident they could get Driscoll to talk. She said I needed to stay out of it. I told her I would. Then I hung up and drove to Kansas City, because I knew the way station she was talking about, and I knew I could position myself nearby without interfering with the operation. The way station was on Interstate 70, just west of the city, a small facility with 2 lanes and a scale house. I parked at a rest area a mile down the road and waited. The next afternoon, I watched as a steady stream of trucks rolled through, each one stopping briefly to be weighed and inspected before continuing on. At 3 p.m., a blue and white freight truck with the logo of Driscoll's company pulled into the way station. I watched through binoculars as the truck stopped. The driver climbed out, and 2 state police officers approached. The driver was average height, wearing jeans and a dark jacket, a cap pulled low. He moved calmly, no signs of stress, and handed over his paperwork when asked. The officers checked the documents, walked around the truck, looked at the tires and the lights. Then one of them said something to the driver, and the driver nodded. They walked together toward the scale house, and a moment later, 2 FBI agents in plain clothes stepped out of an unmarked car and joined them. The conversation lasted 5 minutes. I could not hear what was being said, but the body language was calm, controlled. The driver did not resist, did not argue, did not ask for a lawyer. He just listened, nodded, and followed the agents to their car. The truck was left at the way station, secured by state police. The agents drove off with the driver in the back seat. I waited until they were out of sight. Then I followed at a distance, keeping the unmarked car in view as it headed toward the FBI field office in Springfield. I knew I could not follow them into the building. I knew Vickery would be furious if she found out I was there. But I had come this far, and I needed to know what Driscoll would say. I needed to know if the person who had kept the ledger would finally explain why. I parked 3 blocks from the field office and waited. The interview would take hours. I knew the process. The agents would start with routine questions, establish rapport, build a timeline, and slowly tighten the circle around the inconsistencies. They would ask about his routes, his stops, his rest breaks. They would show him the ledger entries and ask if he recognized the motels. They would present the maintenance contractor aliases and ask if he knew anything about them. They would watch his reactions, measure his hesitations, and look for the moment when his story started to crack. But Driscoll was not an amateur. He had kept a ledger for 18 months without getting caught. He had posed as multiple contractors, disabled security systems, and abducted 11 people without leaving forensic evidence. He understood how to control information, how to compartmentalize, how to stay calm under pressure. The question was whether the agents could break through that control before he realized how much they knew. My phone rang. It was Vickery. She did not sound happy. She said I needed to leave. She said I had been spotted by field office security, and if I did not leave immediately, I would be detained. She said the interview was ongoing, and my presence was a distraction. She said she would call me when it was over, but I needed to go now. I told her I was leaving. I started the car and drove back to the highway, but I did not go far. I pulled into a diner parking lot and waited for Vickery's call. It came 4 hours later. She sounded exhausted. She said Driscoll had cooperated fully. He had answered every question, provided details about his routes and his schedule, and admitted that he had been near several of the motels on the dates in the ledger. But he said he had never checked in under a fake name, never posed as a maintenance contractor, and never had contact with any of the victims. He said he stopped at motels occasionally to rest, usually for a few hours, and he paid cash because it was easier than dealing with credit card receipts for reimbursement. He said he did not remember specific motels or specific nights because they all blurred together after months on the road. I asked if the agents had shown him the ledger. Vickery said yes. Driscoll had looked at it carefully, read several entries, and said he did not recognize the handwriting. He said he had never kept a ledger, had never written down guest names or license plates. and had no idea who had created it. He said if someone was using motels to target victims, it was not him. I asked if the agents believed him. Vickery said they were not sure. Driscoll's story was consistent. His demeanor was calm, and he did not show the typical signs of deception. But the timeline was too strong to ignore. He had been in the right place at the right time, repeatedly, and his employment gaps lined up with the maintenance calls. The task force was treating him as the primary suspect, but without physical evidence or a confession, they could not charge him. I asked what happened next. Vickery said Driscoll had been released. He was free to go, free to return to work, free to continue his routes. The task force was monitoring him through GPS tracking on his truck, and they were coordinating with his employer to flag any deviations from assigned routes. But unless Driscoll made a mistake, or unless new evidence surfaced, the case was stalled. I asked if Driscoll had requested a lawyer. Vickery said no. He had waived his right to counsel and had answered every question voluntarily. She said that was unusual for someone with something to hide. But it was also consistent with someone who was confident they had not left evidence. I asked if the agents had searched his truck. Vickery said no. Driscoll had not consented, and they did not have a warrant. The task force was working on obtaining one, but it would take time, and the legal threshold for a warrant was high, without direct evidence linking Driscoll to a crime. I told Vickery I thought Driscoll was playing them. I said he had cooperated because he knew they did not have enough to charge him. I said he was testing the investigation, seeing how much they knew, and adjusting his behavior accordingly. I said the fact that he had not asked for a lawyer was a tactical choice, not a sign of innocence. Vickery said the task force had considered that possibility. She said the behavioral analysis unit believed Driscoll was a high-functioning offender with strong impulse control and an understanding of law enforcement procedures. She said the interview had not broken him, but it had put him on notice. If Driscoll was the person who kept the ledger, he now knew the FBI was watching, and that might be enough to stop him from acting again. I asked if the task force believed he would stop. Vickery said they did not know. She said some offenders stopped when they felt heat, others escalated. She said the GPS tracking would give them real-time data on his movements, and if he deviated from his routes or returned to any of the ledger locations, they would know immediately. I asked what I should do. Vickery said go home, stay safe, and wait. She said the case was active, the task force was committed, and they would follow every lead until they had answers. She said I had done my part, and now it was time to let the professionals finish it. I told her I would, but we both knew I was lying. I drove back to Missouri and checked into a motel near the Crossroads Inn, the last location I had visited. I could not let it go. The ledger, the victims, the method. It was too precise, too deliberate, too confident. Driscoll had walked into that interview knowing exactly what to say, and he had walked out free. That meant he believed he was untouchable, and people who believe they are untouchable make mistakes. I spent the next 2 days retracing the route again, visiting the motels, talking to anyone who would talk, looking for the detail that had been missed. I went back to the Blue Star Motel in Joplin and asked Rita if she remembered anything else about the night Emily Marsh disappeared. She said no. She had told the FBI everything. I went back to the Pines Motor Lodge in Tulsa and asked Ray if he had heard from the man who claimed to be a journalist. Ray said no. The guy had never come back. I went to the storage facility where the ledger had been found and asked Linda if anyone had tried to access Lot 237 since the FBI cleared it. She said no. The unit had been empty for months and no one had asked about it. I asked if she had security footage from the entrance gate going back further than 90 days. She said the system only kept 3 months of footage, then it was overwritten. I asked if there was any way to recover older footage. She said, no, it was gone. Every lead was cold. Every witness had nothing new. Every piece of evidence had already been analyzed. The case was stalled, and Driscoll was still on the road, still driving, still free. I called Vickery. I asked if the GPS tracking had shown anything unusual. She said no. Driscoll had returned to his assigned routes, made his scheduled stops, and logged his hours according to company policy. He had not deviated, had not stopped at any motels, had not done anything that would trigger an alert. I asked if the task force had obtained a warrant to search his truck. She said they were still working on it. The legal team was building a case based on circumstantial evidence that the judge had not yet been convinced there was probable cause. She said they needed something more concrete, something that directly linked Driscoll to one of the victims or one of the crime scenes. I asked what that something would look like. Vickery said, forensic evidence, DNA, fingerprints, fibers, blood, or a witness who could place Driscoll at a motel on the night of a disappearance, or digital evidence, phone records, emails, that showed he had used the contractor aliases. Without one of those, the warrant would not be approved. I told her I would keep looking. She told me to be careful. She said Driscoll knew he was being watched, and if he suspected I was still investigating, he might see me as a threat. I told her I was aware of the risk. Then I hung up and kept driving. That night, I got another call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. It was the same voice, calm and quiet. He said I had not listened. He said I was still asking questions, still poking around, still making things difficult. He said that was a problem. He said problems had solutions, and I should think carefully about whether I wanted to be part of the solution or part of the problem. I asked what he wanted. He said he wanted me to go home and forget about the ledger. He said the case was closed. The FBI had interviewed their suspect and let him go, and there was nothing left to find. He said if I kept pushing, I would end up like the others. He did not say which others, but I knew. I asked why he was calling me. He said because I was close, closer than I realized, and that made me dangerous. He said I should take the warning seriously. I asked if this was Cole Driscoll. He did not answer. He just hung up. I tried to call back. The number was disconnected. I immediately called Vickery and told her about the second call. She said the task force would trace it, but she already knew what they would find. Another burner phone, activated and discarded, untraceable. She asked where I was. I told her. She said I needed to leave the area immediately and go somewhere public, somewhere with people and cameras. She said if Driscoll was calling me directly, it meant he saw me as a direct threat, and the task force could not guarantee my safety. I asked if the task force could put me in protective custody. She said not without evidence that I was in immediate danger. She said the phone calls were threats, but they were vague, and without a direct connection to Driscoll, there was no legal basis for protection. She said the best thing I could do was leave Missouri, go home, and stay away from the case. I told her I would think about it. She said there was nothing to think about. She said I had a choice between being smart and being dead, and I needed to choose smart. I hung up and sat in the motel room, staring at the phone. 2 calls, same voice, same message. Stop asking questions. The first call had been a warning. The second call had been a threat. And if there was a third call, it would not be a call. It would be action. I packed my things and checked out of the motel. I did not go home. I drove to Kansas City and checked into a large hotel downtown, paid with cash, used a fake name, and stayed on the 10th floor with a view of the street. I kept the curtains closed, the door locked, and my phone on silent. I did not sleep. I just sat in the chair by the window and waited for something to happen. The next morning, Vickery called. She said the task force had traced the second call. It had been made from a cell tower near Columbia, Missouri, less than 5 miles from where I had been staying. The phone had been activated 3 hours before the call and deactivated 10 minutes after. The number had been purchased online using a prepaid card, no billing address, no name, untraceable. I asked if the task force believed it was Driscoll. Vickery said they did, but they could not prove it. She said the timing and location matched Driscoll's route, and the GPS tracking showed he had been in the area when the call was made. But Driscoll's truck had been on the highway, moving at highway speed, which meant he could not have made the call from a stationary location. Either he had made the call while driving, or someone else had made the call on his behalf. I asked if the task force believed Driscoll was working with someone. Vickery said it was possible, but there was no evidence of a partner. She said the ledger entries were consistent with a single offender, and the behavioral analysis unit believed Driscoll operated alone. But the phone calls complicated that theory, because they suggested Driscoll had the resources and coordination to track my movements and respond in real time. I asked how he knew where I was. Vickery said the task force was investigating that. She said Driscoll could have been following me physically, or he could have accessed information through digital means. She said if Driscoll had technical skills, he could have tracked my phone, my credit card, or my vehicle registration. She said I needed to assume Driscoll knew where I was at all times, and I needed to act accordingly. I told her I was in Kansas City, in a hotel, under a fake name. She said that was good, but it was not enough. She said I needed to stop using my phone, stop using my credit cards, and stop moving in predictable patterns. She said the task force could provide guidance on operational security, but they could not provide protection. She said I was on my own, unless I agreed to withdraw from the case entirely. I asked what would happen if I withdrew. She said Driscoll would lose interest. The phone calls would stop, and I would be safe. She said the task force would continue the investigation, and if they developed new evidence, they would pursue charges. But without my involvement, Driscoll would have no reason to see me as a threat. I asked if the task force was close to getting the warrant. Vickery said they were trying, but the judge was not convinced. She said they needed something more, and they needed it soon, because the longer Driscoll remained free, the more risk there was that he would act again. I told her I would stay out of the field. She said that was not enough. She said I needed to leave Kansas City, go home, and stay there. She said if I stayed in the region, Driscoll would find me. I told her I understood. Then I hung up and sat in the hotel room, thinking about the victims. 11 people, maybe more, who had stopped at motels and never left. 11 people who had been seen as opportunities by someone who moved through the world with calm precision, who kept meticulous records, who understood how to exploit vulnerability without leaving traces. And now that same person was hunting me. I knew I should leave. I knew Vickery was right. I was not law enforcement. I was not trained for this, and I was putting myself in danger for a case that was not mine to solve. But I also knew that if I left, Driscoll would disappear. He would change his routes, change his methods, and start over somewhere else. And the ledger would become just another piece of evidence in a cold case file, sitting on a shelf, waiting for someone to connect the dots years too late. I could not let that happen. I left the hotel and drove to the freight company where Driscoll worked. It was a mid-sized operation on the outskirts of Kansas City, a warehouse complex with a small office building and a parking lot full of trucks. I parked across the street and watched. Drivers came and went, checking in at the office, picking up assignments, climbing into their rigs, and pulling out onto the highway. I watched for 3 hours, looking for Driscoll's truck, looking for the blue and white logo I had seen at the way station. The truck never appeared. I called the company and asked to speak with dispatch. A woman answered, sounded busy. I said I was trying to reach Cole Driscoll about a delivery. She said Driscoll was on the road, not available, and I should call back later. I asked when he would be back. She said his next scheduled return was in 4 days. I thanked her and hung up. 4 days. Driscoll was on a long haul, somewhere between Kansas City and wherever his route took him. The GPS tracking would show his exact location, but I did not have access to that data. Only the task force did, and they were not going to share it with me. I needed another approach. I drove back to the storage facility in Missouri and asked Linda if I could see the rental agreement for Lot 237. She said the FBI had taken it as evidence. I asked if she had a copy. She checked her files, said yeah, she kept copies of everything. She printed it out and handed it to me. The rental agreement was 1 page, handwritten in block letters, the same style as the ledger. The name on the agreement was James Patterson. The address was fake, a non-existent street in a small town in Kansas. The phone number was disconnected. The signature was illegible. The payment was logged as cash, 6 months up front, no deposit. I asked Linda if she remembered the person who had rented the unit. She said no. It had been over a year ago, and she saw dozens of renters every week. I asked if she had any other records, anything that might help identify the person. She said no. The FBI had taken everything. I thanked her and left. I sat in my car and stared at the rental agreement. The handwriting was the key. If I could prove the handwriting on the rental agreement matched the handwriting in the ledger, And if I could prove the handwriting in the ledger matched Driscoll's handwriting, then I would have direct evidence linking Driscoll to the storage unit and the ledger. That would be enough for a warrant. But I needed a sample of Driscoll's handwriting, and I had no way to get one without approaching him directly. I called Vickery and told her what I was thinking. She said the task force had already considered handwriting analysis. They had obtained samples from Driscoll's employment records, driver logs, and personal documents. The forensic handwriting analyst had compared them to the ledger and the rental agreement. The results were inconclusive. The analyst said there were similarities, but not enough to make a definitive match. Driscoll had printed in block letters, which made comparison difficult. The analyst said they needed more samples, preferably cursive writing or signed documents, to make a stronger case. I asked if the task force had asked Driscoll to provide additional samples. Vickery said they had tried during the interview. Driscoll had declined, said he did not see how it was relevant, and the agents did not push because they did not want to tip him off about the handwriting analysis. I asked if there was any other way to get samples. Vickery said the task force was looking. They were checking Driscoll's rental agreements, utility bills, and personal correspondence. But so far, they had not found anything that provided a clear cursive sample. I told Vickery I had an idea. She asked what it was. I said I was not going to tell her, because if it worked, it would provide the evidence the task force needed, and if it did not work, she could deny any knowledge of it. Vickery said that was a terrible idea. She said whatever I was planning, I should stop. She said I was going to get myself killed, or I was going to compromise the investigation, or both. She said the task force was close to getting the warrant, and I needed to let them handle it. I told her I would think about it. Then I hung up. I drove to the Crossroads Inn in Columbia and asked Tess if I could see the guest ledger from the night Aaron Fletcher disappeared. She said the FBI had taken the original, but she had a photocopy in the office files. She found it and handed it to me. I flipped through the pages, looking at the entries. Most were printed in different handwriting, different styles, some cursive, some block letters, some barely legible. Then I found the entry for Gregory Cole, the fake name from the ledger. The entry was printed in neat block letters, the same style as the ledger, but at the bottom of the entry there was a signature, a cursive signature, scrawled quickly, barely readable, but cursive. I asked Tess if guests were required to sign the ledger. She said yeah, it was company policy, every guest had to sign. I asked if the FBI had noticed the signature. She said she did not know. They had taken the original and never mentioned it. I took a photo of the signature with my phone. Then I thanked Tess and left. I called Vickery and told her what I had found. She said the task force had reviewed the photocopies of the guest ledgers, but they had focused on the printed entries, not the signatures. She said if I had a clear image of the signature, I should send it to her immediately. I sent the photo. Vickery called back 10 minutes later. She said the forensic analyst was reviewing it now, comparing it to the samples they had from Driscoll. She said if the signature matched, it would be enough for a warrant. I asked how long it would take. She said hours, maybe a day. She said I needed to stay where I was, stay safe, and wait for the results. I told her I would, but I knew I could not wait, because if the signature matched, Driscoll would be arrested and if Driscoll was arrested, the victims would get justice, and the case would be closed. But if the signature did not match, or if something went wrong, Driscoll would disappear, and I would be left with nothing but questions and threats. I needed to know the truth, and the only way to get it was to confront Driscoll directly. I knew confronting Driscoll was reckless. I knew it violated every rule of investigative procedure and personal safety. But I also knew that the case was balanced on the edge of a signature analysis that might take days. And in those days, Driscoll could vanish. The GPS tracking told the task force where his truck was, but it did not tell them what he was thinking, what he was planning, or whether he was already preparing to disappear. I called the freight company again, this time pretending to be a shipping coordinator, trying to confirm a delivery schedule. The dispatcher gave me Driscoll's current route, Kansas City to Amarillo, with scheduled stops in 3 towns along the way. She said he was due at a truck stop outside Wichita in 4 hours for a mandatory rest break. I knew the truck stop. It was one of the large ones, the kind with a restaurant, showers, a convenience store, and rows of diesel pumps. It was also one of the locations within 20 miles of a ledger entry. I drove south, pushing the speed limit, watching the highway markers count down. I did not have a plan. I just knew I needed to see Driscoll face to face. Needed to look at the person who had written those 43 entries. Needed to understand how someone could move through the world that way. I arrived at the truck stop an hour before Driscoll was scheduled. I parked near the back of the lot, away from the main building, where I could see the entrance ramps and the fuel lanes. The lot was busy, trucks coming and going, drivers walking to and from the building, the constant hum of diesel engines and air brakes. I waited. The sun was setting, the sky turning orange and grey, the lights around the building coming on one by one. I watched every truck that pulled in, looking for the blue and white logo, looking for Driscoll's rig. At 6:30, I saw it. The truck pulled off the highway, rolled through the entrance, and headed for the fuel lanes. I watched as it stopped at a pump, the engine idling, the driver's door still closed. Then, the door opened, and a man climbed down. Average height, dark jacket, jeans, a cap pulled low. He moved with calm efficiency, swiped a card at the pump, started the fuel flowing, and walked toward the building. I got out of my car and followed at a distance. He went inside, headed for the restaurant section, and took a seat at a booth near the back. He ordered coffee, pulled out a phone, and started scrolling. He did not look around, did not check over his shoulder, did not show any sign that he was worried about being watched. I sat down at the booth across from him. He looked up, his face neutral, his eyes flat and unreadable. I said, "Cole Driscoll." He did not react. He just looked at me, took a sip of his coffee, and said, "Do I know you?" I told him my name. I told him I had been investigating the motel disappearances, tracing the ledger route, and following the evidence that led directly to him. He set the coffee down carefully. He said, "You should not be here." I asked if he was the one who had been calling me, threatening me, telling me to stop asking questions. He did not answer. He just looked at me with that same flat expression, like I was a problem he was calculating how to solve. I asked if he had kept the ledger, if he had posed as maintenance contractors at 7 motels across 3 states, if he had watched Emily Marsh David Cho, Kenneth Pryor, Jessica Browning, Aaron Fletcher, and 6 others before taking them. He said, "I do not know what you are talking about." I told him the FBI had his route logs, his employment records, his GPS data. I told him they had the handwriting samples, the maintenance call records, and the timeline that placed him at every location on the dates of the disappearances. I told him the forensic analyst was comparing his signature to the signature in the guest ledger right now, and when the match came back, they would have a warrant for his arrest. He leaned back in the booth, calm, unbothered. He said, "Then why are you here? If the FBI has all that, why are you sitting in front of me instead of letting them do their job?" I told him because I needed to understand. I needed to know why someone would keep a ledger, why they would document their own crimes, why they would leave it in a storage unit where it could be found. He smiled, just a little. He said, "You think I kept a ledger?" I said, "The evidence says you did." He said, "Evidence is just a story someone tells. The FBI tells one story. I tell another. Right now, they do not have enough to make their story stick, which is why I am sitting here drinking coffee instead of sitting in an interrogation room." I asked what his story was. He said his story was simple. He was a truck driver. He drove long routes, stopped at motels when he was tired, paid cash because it was easier. Sometimes motels had problems. Cameras went offline. Maintenance got delayed. That was not his fault. That was just how low-budget motels operated. And if people disappeared from those motels, that was a tragedy. But it was not his crime. I told him that story did not explain the ledger. It did not explain the fake names, the fake license plates, the maintenance contractor aliases, or the phone calls threatening me to stop investigating. He said, "I did not make any phone calls, and I do not know anything about a ledger. Maybe someone else kept it. Maybe someone wanted to make it look like a truck driver was responsible. Maybe you are chasing the wrong person." I asked if he was saying he was being framed. He shrugged. He said, "I am saying the FBI interviewed me, asked their questions, and let me go. That tells you everything you need to know about how strong their case is." I told him the case was not over. The signature analysis would come back, the warrant would be approved, and they would search his truck. And when they did, they would find something. A piece of evidence, a forensic link, something he had missed because no one operates for 18 months without leaving a trace. He leaned forward, his voice quiet and steady. He said, "You are right about one thing. No one operates that long without leaving a trace. But you are assuming the trace leads to me. What if it leads somewhere else? What if the person who kept that ledger knew exactly what they were doing, knew exactly how to make it look like someone else, and left just enough evidence to keep people like you busy while they moved on to something new?" I asked if that was a confession. He said, "No, that is a hypothetical. I deal in freight logistics. I understand supply chains, route optimization, and risk management. If I were the kind of person who kept a ledger, I would understand those same principles. And I would know that the best way to avoid getting caught is to make sure the evidence points away from you, not toward you." I told him he had just described exactly how the case worked. The ledger, the fake identities, the burner phones, the maintenance calls. All of it was designed to create distance to make the crimes look random and opportunistic while the person responsible moved freely. He said, "Sounds like you have it all figured out. So why are you here talking to me instead of celebrating with the FBI?" I told him because I wanted to hear him say it. I wanted to hear him admit what he had done, even if it was just to me, even if it would never hold up in court. Because the victims deserved that. Their families deserved that. And the truth deserved to be spoken, even if only once. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "The truth is, people disappear every day. They leave their jobs, their families, their lives. They walk away and start over somewhere else. Sometimes they do it by choice. Sometimes someone makes the choice for them. But either way, they disappear. And most of the time, no one notices. No one cares. No one investigates. The world just moves on like they were never there." I asked if that was what he told himself, that the people he took did not matter, that no one would notice, that the world would move on. He said, "I did not say I took anyone. I said people disappear, and they do, all the time. Whether I had anything to do with it is a question the FBI is trying to answer, and so far they have not." I told him they would. The signature would match, the warrant would come through, and they would find the proof they needed. And when they did, he would spend the rest of his life in prison, and the ledger would be the testimony that convicted him. He finished his coffee and stood up. He said, "Maybe, or maybe the signature does not match. Maybe the warrant gets denied. Maybe I keep driving my routes, and this whole thing fades into just another cold case that no one solves. You should think about that before you keep pushing. Because if you are wrong, and I am just a driver who got unlucky with bad timing, then you are wasting your time. And if you are right, and I am the person you think I am, then sitting across from me in a truck stop was the dumbest thing you could have done." He walked out. I sat there, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I pulled out my phone and called Vickery. I told her I had just confronted Driscoll at a truck stop outside Wichita. There was a long silence on the other end. Then she said, "You did what?" I told her again. I said Driscoll had not admitted anything directly, but he had spoken in hypotheticals that made it clear he understood exactly how the crimes had been committed. I said his demeanor was calm, controlled, and confident. I said he believed the FBI did not have enough to charge him, and he was right unless the signature analysis came back positive. Vickery said, "You just compromised the investigation. If Driscoll lawyers up now and claims you harassed him, it could damage the case. If he disappears, it is on you. If something happens to you, it is on you." What were you thinking? I told her I was thinking the case was stalled, and I needed to push. I needed to see if Driscoll would crack, if he would make a mistake, if he would say something that could be used as evidence. Vickery said, "He did not. You got nothing. And now he knows you are actively pursuing him, which means he is going to be even more careful. The task force was planning to maintain surveillance without tipping him off, and you just blew that. Where are you now?" I told her I was still at the truck stop. She said, "Get out of there. Get in your car, drive to a police station, and stay there until I can coordinate with local law enforcement. Do not go back to your hotel. Do not go anywhere predictable. Driscoll knows your face now, and if he sees you as a direct threat, he will act." I asked if the signature analysis had come back. She said not yet. The analyst was working on it, but it would take at least another 12 hours. She said the task force was also working on the warrant, but the judge wanted more evidence before approving a search of Driscoll's truck. I asked what more evidence they needed. Vickery said something definitive: a forensic link, a witness statement, or a digital trail that directly connected Driscoll to one of the crimes. The signature might be enough, or it might not. It depended on how strong the match was. I told her I would go to a police station and wait. She said, "Good." She said she would call me when the analysis came back. Then she said, "Do not do anything else. Do not follow Driscoll. Do not try to investigate on your own. Just wait. Can you do that?" I told her I could. Then I hung up and walked out of the truck stop. I got in my car and sat there, watching the building, watching the fuel lanes, watching for Driscoll's truck. It was gone. He had finished fueling, climbed back into the cab, and driven off while I was on the phone with Vickery. I had no idea where he was going, what route he was taking, or whether he would follow his scheduled stops or deviate. I started the car and drove toward Wichita, looking for a police station. I found one near the downtown area, parked in the visitor lot, and went inside. I told the desk officer I was a researcher working with the FBI on an active case, and I needed a safe place to wait for a few hours. The officer asked for identification. I showed my driver's license and Vickery's contact information. The officer made a call, spoke with someone, and then told me I could wait in a conference room on the second floor. I sat in the conference room for 3 hours, drinking vending machine coffee and checking my phone every few minutes. No calls, no messages, no updates from Vickery. At 10 p.m., my phone rang. It was Vickery. She said the signature analysis had come back. The forensic analyst had compared the signature from the Crossroads Inn guest ledger to the samples from Driscoll's employment records. The analysis showed a high probability match. Not definitive, but strong enough to support a warrant application. I asked if the judge had approved the warrant. Vickery said yes. The warrant had been signed 20 minutes ago. The task force was coordinating with state police to locate Driscoll's truck and conduct a traffic stop. Once the truck was secured, they would execute the search warrant and look for evidence linking Driscoll to the disappearances. I asked where Driscoll was now. Vickery said the GPS tracking showed his truck was on Interstate 35, southbound, about 60 miles outside Wichita. He was maintaining speed, following his scheduled route, and showed no signs of deviation. The task force expected to intercept him within the hour. I asked if I could be there. Vickery said no. She said the operation was law enforcement only, and civilian presence would create liability. She said I should stay at the police station until the operation was complete, and she would call me with the result. I told her I would stay, but after I hung up, I walked out of the police station, got in my car, and drove south on Interstate 35. I knew I should not. I knew it was reckless and stupid and could compromise everything, but I had come this far and I needed to see it through. I followed the highway for 40 minutes, watching for signs of the operation. Then I saw it. A line of police vehicles on the shoulder, lights flashing. A truck pulled over in front of them. The blue and white logo was visible even from a distance. I pulled over a quarter-mile back and watched through binoculars. Officers surrounded the truck, weapons drawn, shouting commands. The driver's door opened slowly, and a figure climbed down with hands raised. Driscoll. He moved carefully, following instructions, no sudden movements. The officers approached, cuffed him, and led him to a patrol car. Then, a team of agents moved toward the truck. They climbed into the cab, opened the cargo area, and began the search. I watched for over an hour as they worked, removing items, photographing everything, bagging evidence. I could not see what they were finding, but the fact that the search was taking so long suggested they were finding something. My phone rang. It was Vickery. She said the search had turned up several items of interest: a duffel bag containing zip ties, duct tape, and a handheld GPS device with coordinates matching several of the motel locations. A laptop with browsing history showing research into motel security systems and temporary phone services. And a small notebook with handwritten notes printed in the same block letters as the ledger, containing details about truck stops, rest areas, and highway routes. I asked if any of the items directly linked Driscoll to the victims. Vickery said not yet. The forensic team was analyzing everything, looking for DNA, fingerprints, or other trace evidence. But the items were consistent with the profile of someone who was planning and executing abductions. Combined with the signature match, the timeline, and the circumstantial evidence, the task force believed they had enough to charge Driscoll with multiple counts of kidnapping and murder. I asked what Driscoll had said when they arrested him. Vickery said he had not said anything. He had invoked his right to remain silent and requested a lawyer. The interrogation was over before it began. I asked what would happen next. Vickery said Driscoll would be held pending arraignment. The task force would continue analyzing the evidence, building the case, and coordinating with prosecutors. If the forensic analysis linked any of the items to the victims, the charges would be upgraded. If not, the case would proceed on the strength of the circumstantial evidence, and it would be up to a jury to decide. I asked if she thought they had enough. Vickery said she did not know. She said the case was strong, but it was not airtight. Driscoll had been careful, and the lack of direct forensic evidence was a problem. She said the prosecutor would make the call, and the task force would follow through. But there were no guarantees. I asked if I could see the evidence. Vickery said no. She said the evidence was restricted to law enforcement and legal teams only. She said I had done my part. I had provided critical leads, and the task force was grateful. But from this point forward, the case was out of my hands. I told her I understood. Then I asked if she could tell me one thing. I asked if the ledger was real, or if Driscoll had planted it as a decoy. Vickery was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We think it is real. We think Driscoll kept it as a record, maybe as a trophy, maybe as operational documentation. We think he rented the storage unit to keep it secure, and then he abandoned it when he realized the Branson incident had compromised his pattern. We think he believed the ledger would never be found, or if it was found, it would not be connected to him. But you found it. You connected it, and that is why we have him now." I thanked her. She said, "You should go home. Get some rest. Stay safe. This is over for you." I told her I would. Then I hung up and drove back to Kansas City. I checked into a different hotel, this time under my real name, and slept for the first time in days. 3 days later, Vickery called again. She said the forensic analysis had come back. The DNA on one of the zip ties matched Emily Marsh. The GPS coordinates on the handheld device included the exact location where Kenneth Pryor's car had been found. The laptop browsing history included searches for the names of 2 other victims, conducted days before their disappearances. The prosecutor had filed charges. Cole Driscoll was being held without bail, charged with 11 counts of kidnapping, 6 counts of murder, and multiple counts of evidence tampering and identity fraud. The trial was set for the following year. I asked if Driscoll had said anything. Vickery said no. He had remained silent, refused all interviews, and his lawyer had advised him not to cooperate. The case would proceed to trial, and the evidence would speak for itself. I asked if the task force had identified any additional victims. Vickery said they were still investigating. The VICAP searches had turned up over 50 possible cases that matched the pattern, and the task force was working with local jurisdictions to review each one. It would take months, maybe years, to determine the full scope of Driscoll's crimes. I asked what would happen to the ledger. Vickery said it would remain in evidence, and it would be presented at trial as the key document linking Driscoll to the crime scenes. She said it was the breakthrough that had made the entire case possible, and without it, Driscoll would still be on the road. I thanked her for everything. She said, "No, thank you. You did not have to do any of this. You could have walked away, but you did not. And because you did not, 11 families have answers. Maybe more. That matters." I told her I hoped it was enough. She said, "It has to be." I hung up and sat in the hotel room, staring at the window, thinking about the route, the motels, the victims, the ledger. The way Driscoll had moved through the world with such calm precision, selecting people who were already invisible, taking them in the night, and leaving nothing but questions. And I thought about the moment in the truck stop, when he had looked at me with those flat, unreadable eyes and said, "People disappear every day," like it was just a fact, like it was inevitable, like he was just part of the machinery that made it happen. But he was wrong. People do not just disappear. They are taken. They are erased. They are stolen from the world by someone who believes they have the right. And when that happens, someone has to care enough to trace the route, connect the dots, and make sure the truth does not disappear with them. The trial took place 8 months later. I attended every day, sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching as the prosecution presented the evidence. The ledger, the handwriting analysis, the GPS data, the zip tie with Emily Marsh's DNA, the laptop with victim searches, the timeline that placed Driscoll at every location, witness after witness, expert after expert, building the case piece by piece. Driscoll sat at the defense table, silent and expressionless, wearing a suit that made him look like any other middle-aged man. His lawyer argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that Driscoll's presence near the motels was explained by his job, that the ledger could have been created by someone else, that the DNA on the zip tie was contaminated or planted. The lawyer argued that the prosecution had built a narrative that fit the evidence, but that did not mean the narrative was true. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, they found Cole Driscoll guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, with consecutive sentences for each victim. Driscoll showed no reaction. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, and I never saw him again. Afterward, I stood outside the courthouse in the cold afternoon light, surrounded by reporters and family members of the victims. Emily Marsh's sister gave a statement, thanking the task force, the prosecution, and everyone who had worked to bring Driscoll to justice. She said Emily had been traveling alone, looking for a fresh start, and she had deserved to arrive safely. She said no one should have to disappear the way Emily did. I did not give a statement. I just stood there, listening, and when it was over, I walked to my car and drove home. The case was closed. The ledger was filed away. The motels on the route remained open, serving travelers who would never know what had happened there. And somewhere, in a prison cell, Cole Driscoll was sitting alone, silent, keeping whatever remained of his story locked away. But the victims were not forgotten. Their names were recorded, their families had answers, and the ledger that had documented their disappearances now documented their justice. That was not everything, but it was enough.